Hey everybody, this is Rybo at the Bench doing another pocket knife review today on the Kershaw Emerson CQC-4KXL. Long name, this is the largest knife in the Kershaw Emerson series. Comes in this nice little Emerson branded skull box, and you can see the model right there, 4KXL. I have actually seen this knife sold as the 4KXXL some places, so not really sure what's up with that, but this is the largest one. Let's talk price and then we'll get into size. So price on this knife, you're gonna pay about 30-40 bucks for this thing. I believe when it came out it was around 60 something, but you can pick it up on Amazon, eBay, Blade HQ in that $30 to $40 range. Size of this knife, this is a very large knife, so from tip to end of the handle here, you're looking at almost 9 inches, almost maybe 3 3/4, 4 inches of edged blade, and then 5 inches of handle material here. Size comparison relative to other knives, so let me bring in the Kershaw Emerson CQC-7K that I've reviewed before, and this is where you can really tell how large this knife is, because it's practically the same design between these two, with a few small differences, one of them being size. This guy's massive. If you're not familiar with the Kershaw Emerson line of knives, I'll also throw in the Kershaw Skyline, so you can kind of get an idea. And then because it is becoming a staple, and I love it, and it's actually a good size relation to this knife, the Hoffman Richter HR-15 Survivor Tactical whatever knife. Obviously this guy is going to be a lot lighter than the Hoffman Richter that comes in around 10 ounces, 9 ounces, something like that. But these two knives are really close in size, which means it's ridiculously large. All right, so we did price, we talked a little bit about size. Let's go through this knife. So if you've seen my review on the 7K, which we'll leave out here for a second, you're probably going to be pretty familiar with this knife, because this is practically the same thing, just larger, and in a frame lock version instead of the liner lock. So first of all, frame lock. This is a nice frame lock. I'm not a huge fan of frame locks, but definitely in a larger knife like this, I think it's the way to go over something like this. If you've watched my review of this, one of the things that I was very unhappy with was the fact that it is a liner lock, and I made modifications to mine, removing the liner on this side that doesn't act as anything but kind of extra weight. But that's the issue, right? So the larger the knife you have, obviously the more the weight. And if you have a liner lock, I guess especially if you're someone like Ernie Emerson and you're a stickler for kind of overbuilt tactical, knives, you're going to want to have double liners, which just means there's 2 plates of steel in there plus the blade, instead of just a 1. So the way that they've overcome that on this knife, and I think some of the other CQC K knives, is to just make it a frame lock. And I actually do really like that on this knife because it makes it a little bit more ergonomic. It's not too thick, but you also gain a lot, or I guess lose a lot in weight. So the liner, the frame lock does work pretty well. Other features of this knife, so it has the Ernie Emerson wave feature here. Probably most knife enthusiasts pretty familiar with that. Works fine except for it tears up your pocket, so I don't really do it. It was kind of a cool, fun thing when I first got one of these knives to, pull out and it's just deployed and, scare people with it or whatever. But in practicality, I like my pants and I don't want, the pockets all ripped up, so I don't really use it. You have the thumb stud here, which is pretty typical on Emerson knives, and I really like this. I wish, I don't know if he has a trademark on that, but I do wish more knives had something like this. And then you have this blade, which is, somewhat similar to this one without the clip point. And I mean, this is just a good blade shape. Nothing really special about it, but definitely more of the tactical feel. To me, this is not an everyday carry knife. None of the knives in the series are really everyday carry knives. These are kind of your tactical, whatever knives. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. All right, so ergonomics on this knife, not too bad actually. I think that this knife is, given the size of it and the weight, the balance is pretty good, and the ergonomics are pretty nice. I'm like I said, I'm not a frame lock guy, but for a frame lock, this actually feels really nice in the hands. I think it's just about the right width for thickness of the handle here for a knife of this size. And so I kind of like it. The wave feature always has provided a nice ramped, jimping kind of support there, and so that also feels pretty nice. Other than that, the Ergonomics G10 scales are very nice. I've complimented the Kershaw on this before, but Kershaw always does seem to get the G10 right. I love the Skyline. I think it's just grippy enough without being overly grippy. I really, really, really hate the Rat 2, which otherwise is just one of my favorite knives ever, in that it almost has no grip to the G10. Again, this is very similar to what you'll find on the Skyline, maybe a little bit smoother, but right on par with what you have on the 7K here as well. And they did, great job with that. All right, so that's about it on ergonomics. Let's do steel talk. There's not much to say here. This is an 8 CR13 MOV steel, exactly what you'd expect. Both of these are exactly the same, and sadly, most Kershaws are the same. At least most Kershaws under 30 bucks. The Skyline is obviously an exception, but really a lot of the Kershaws that are going around now have that same steel. And while Kershaw does a lot with the heat treatment to really, I think, get everything you can out of the steel, and really it performs, not too bad. It's just a shame. I'd love to see some variety, and I think especially with a knife like this, where you have a collaboration and basically just a straight, not rip-off because Emerson, signed off on the design, but you have basically a straight rip-off of a very high dollar, $200 to $300 knife, and the steel choice is just once again highlighting the fact that this is just a budget ripoff. Had they upgraded the steel a little bit and a couple other things, it's like, yeah, this is a good alternative to having an actual Emerson. But to me, it kind of just highlights the cheapness of it. But it gets the job done for everyday carry. But then again, this is not an everyday carry blade. This is a tactical blade, and do you really want a cheaper steel on a tactical blade? I don't want a tactical blade, so it doesn't matter to me, but something to consider. All right, so talked about steel. Let's talk about overall deployment, because this is something I've noticed with both of these knives, in that out of the box, both of these are locked down so tight that you almost can't open them at all. I was really shocked when this guy came because it was so, the centering was so off. And the pivot screw was screwed down so tight I almost couldn't open it. And sadly, the exact same thing happened with this. And I just don't understand that. Sure, the pivot screw is just a flathead screwdriver, so, I just pulled out my pocket knife and kind of loosened that up a bit. But why do that? I mean, especially if you're thinking that, someone who's not a knife person might pick this up, try to open it, and it's just ridiculously hard. It just gives you a bad first impression of the knife, and just, I don't know, it's just, I don't know, kind of dumb to me. But the pivot screw is really tight, and even when I loosen it up, you can see it comes out of here fine. It's fairly smooth. I did put some CLP on this, but sadly, the action on this knife is just not very good. So I'm not talking about using the wave feature. I'm talking about only traditional deploy. There's kind of like a break, and I don't know if this has to do with the fact that the centering is off and the knife is actually rubbing up against this frame over here, or this liner over here, I'm sorry. You can probably see that it's actually hitting that. If I push it over with my finger, you know, then it won't be. But basically there's this kind of break where you pull this knife and it finally clicks. And if you kind of push this down, maybe you can see or hear this. But that's just kind of weird, and what that means is when I go to try to open this knife, it takes a lot of force to get this knife out. You know, which is not true with this guy. I mean, this guy, it's not as good as like the Rat 2, but I mean, this guy flies out. Unfortunately, I just still have not been able to get the action right on this knife. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of kind of intention with your you know, kind of flicking motion. So that's not great. The other thing that's not great about this knife, and again just highlights the cheapness, if you can see on this thumb stud, the thumb stud is either too large, and I think that's what it is actually, too large or just not fitted right. I think it's actually too large, to where it doesn't even sit flat on the blade here. It's kind of, I mean, well, you can see the light peeking out underneath there. Let me see if I can get a close-up of that to really highlight it. But I mean, whatever. It's not a huge deal again because this guy isn't moving, but it's just like, come on, like that's just a basic feature that should be, you know, pretty easy to get right, and it's not. And that really disappointed me because otherwise I was pretty impressed with the fit and finish of this knife. I mean, that blade is just a beautiful kind of two-tone. It's got this kind of, I don't know what you call this, kind of not sandblasted quite, because if you look at it compared to you know, the Skyline, it's totally different, but you've got this kind of highly polished steel up here, and then you've got this kind of, you know, I don't know what you call that, but this gravelly looking, it's just a nice looking kind of steel wherever the hollow grind starts. And that's kind of cool because that matches the frame steel. And all of that just makes it, you know, I think a very attractive steel knife at least. But unfortunately there are some things like this that kind of throw that off. One of the other things that kind of throws this knife off to me is the fact, and the same is true with this guy here, the fact that they didn't use Torx screws on this. And I guess you could say, well, they actually did one better and used, you know, traditional screwdrivers, but I don't find that to be the case. You know, Torx, I think, is just kind of widely accepted in the knife world, and to me, using traditional flat and Phillips head just kind of makes it feel a little bit cheap. Add to that on this knife at least, the screws are backed by flat pieces of metal. So if you're trying to unscrew these guys, it's going to be very difficult because this is going to just want to spin freely. At least with this, you have screws on both sides. And I guess that's because this is a frame lock, but still, it seems like you could have added something there to grab onto while you're unscrewing this. And so it just kind of makes taking the knife apart a pain. This knife has a reversible pocket clip. However, because of the wave feature and the frame lock here, you cannot wear this knife, I guess, tip down. You have to wear this knife tip up, which is, you know, not a problem with for me. One of the other things that I'm just not crazy about, and this is just more of an Emerson thing than anything, but I just think I guess I should flip it around and actually show the pocket clip. I just think the pocket clip is just insanely low, and I don't know if that has to do with the wave feature. I can't imagine it does because you're just dragging it against your pocket. But this knife carries really, really high. Let me use the Emerson box to show that. I mean, both of these knives carry pretty high. This one is pretty standard, I guess, for other knives. But this guy carries just really, really high, and it's just very, very pointy there. And so when you have a knife that's already 9 inches long, carrying high is just, you know, not great because look at this thing. I mean, that's not very small in the pocket. Let me put the Skyline up next to it. That's a pretty large knife in the pocket. And then you're kind of just accentuating that and showing it off to everyone by carrying, you know, a 1/4 of it, a 1/5 of it, you know, outside of the pocket, which is just, kind of unfortunate to me. One other thing I should have mentioned was the pivot screw actually has a flat back as well, or I guess a rounded back, the same as the 7K, and that really makes it a bear to take apart. I speak from experience because obviously I took this one apart to cut the screw down, and it was very difficult to get a grip on that. All right, so final thoughts on this knife. You know, this is not a knife for me, and I'm not a tactical kind of knife person. I just want an everyday carry knife. I don't need something to defend my life with or to look cool with or overbuilt or whatever. And I'm not knocking people who do. I mean, there's a cool factor of Emerson. I mean, the box pretty much says it all. Like, Emerson's a cool brand. I would love to own an Emerson sometime. But what I don't get is if you're going after that, if you're going after that aesthetic, if you're going after that belief, why not just save up and get an actual Emerson? Ernie Emerson obviously knows what he's doing. He cares greatly about the build quality of his knives. And so to me, it seems very cheap to kind of pass on this knife, which is made from a very, very cheap steel. Takes a lot of shortcuts that result in things like the thumb stud not even fitting to the knife. It's just poorly made. It's just kind of your traditional, or I guess your typical Kershaw Chinese folder, which means it's not terrible by any means. It's completely serviceable. It's cool, whatever. But it's just it's a shell of what it could be, and what it could be is an Emerson knife. And so again, like I said in my review of the 7K, I don't see the purpose of this line. I get wanting to offer a budget friendly Emerson, but besides just having the skull on there, this isn't an Emerson product. I'm shocked that he stands behind this. So cutter carry, I mean, for me, this was never going to be a carry even when I picked it up. I just picked it up to review it, and I do plan to sell it. I mean, I don't think that this is really going to be anyone's carry knife just due to the size of it. But, it's a cool knife, and, if you like this kind of thing, sure, pick it up. If you can get it for, $30 and you really like this kind of thing and you want a big camp knife, sure, pick it up. For me, however, I will be selling this so that I can keep around the real daddy, the HR-15 Survivor Tactical whatever knife. Because why have, I don't know, 6 ounces when you can carry around 10 ounces in your pocket? All right, everybody, that'll do it for today. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.